Hello, so today I'm going to be doing a overview of all of the indie neutral and spicy neutral palettes in my collection, and usually I do these palette roundup videos just like talking straight to the camera facing you guys because I feel like that's a bit more personable, but right now I have a sty on my eye, so out of caution I'm not wearing any makeup, not just eye makeup. I'm just keeping my face completely clean so that it can heal as fast as possible and I can get back to making the kind of content I want to. But I wanted to put out like something in the meantime, and I've been wanting to do a video like this, and I felt like this would be an acceptable video to do overhead style because I feel like I can actually like kind of point to specific shadows and just like maybe do some light swatches even. I'm not entirely sure what I'm gonna do, but hopefully this video turns out good. Now some of these lean more in the spicy neutral direction rather than like a true neutral. I feel like in general indies tend to have just like a lot of special shades in their palettes. So even if they are neutral colors, they just have more pizzazz than mainstream palettes do, but also typically like a little bit more color. And everyone's definition of what is a neutral or spicy neutral is going to differ slightly. So some of these might have like even bright pops of color, but they are mostly what I consider neutral palettes. Now this video is not going to be in a ranking style. It's more so just a roundup of all the neutral and spicy neutral palettes because I feel like what I prefer, like, preferences matter so much when it comes to neutral palettes, and I mean rankings by definition do really depend on your preferences, but my goal with this video is to kind of just like talk about each of these palettes one by one and point out any like details I notice about them, strengths and weaknesses, and like what I consider a strength, it may be a weakness to you and vice versa, but hopefully through pointing out all these things, it'll be helpful for you to understand like what is offered right now in the indie makeup world. And also I will be talking about a couple of palettes here that have been discontinued, just in case like, you know, you have them in your collection or you're curious how something compares to it. I'm not doing like strict comparisons, but hopefully this video will still be helpful. So I'm going to start by talking about all of the neutral palettes from Glaminatrix because I feel like they have really done a great job curating some spicy neutral type of palettes, and this one is Barely Basic. I'm starting with Barely Basic because I feel like this was the brand's first foray into a true spicy neutral palette, and what I mean by that is like they had the Sugar and Spice palette prior to this, which I will get to in a minute, but that one has more like pops of color, and this one I feel like there's a true neutral row, and then there's these, or column, and then there's these three columns of mattes that are tones that I feel like they technically have some color to them, but I feel like a lot of people in the indie makeup community would consider these like in the neutral territory. This palette to me is kind of like a 50-50 split of more cool tones and warm tones because I feel like this is a more cool toned column, the mauves are more cool toned, but then these two in the middle are more warm toned. And so I feel like it's a pretty good split, but I feel like I've seen a lot of people call this more of like a fall neutral palette, which I do agree. I feel like these are tones that I would gravitate towards in the fall time. I do appreciate that the mattes in this palette have like 3 depth ranges, so it's very easy to put together quick neutral looks on a day-to-day basis. You don't really have to think about it. You can just go down the column and follow like, you know, light, medium, deep to put together a very easy look. And I do really like this matte formula. I feel like it's pretty beginner friendly and foolproof. It's not super difficult to blend out. It's not difficult to build up. I just feel like it kind of responds very easily to even like a beginner. The one drawback to the mattes in my opinion is that I feel like with the middle 2 columns, these 2 shades and these 2 shades are just like a little too close in depth. Like I feel like these 2 mattes up here should have gone a little lighter to make sure that there was like a distinct difference between all 3. And also for my preferences, I wish that this matte wasn't this light because I just feel like there's a huge jump from this one to this one, which if you want something to blend this out with, this might be a little too light, and for me at least this is like pretty useless on my skin tone, so I just wish that this was more of like a, I guess like a mid-tone. But I do overall really enjoy the matte selection in this palette, and this palette actually lives in one of my top drawers because I do reach into it from time to time to just like really quickly do looks. But in addition to the matte selection, I also really love the shimmers in this palette. I feel like the shimmers in this palette are that super sparkly texture that I've come to really love from Glaminatrix, and I feel like there was a slight change when they moved over to doing lab manufactured palettes. I feel like the shimmers just got so much more sparkly and they were pressed a little firmer so that they're more like sturdy, and these are just so gorgeous. This row over here does lean a bit more neutral, especially this shimmer and this shimmer. They are proper neutrals. This one's more champagne, this one's more of a mauve. This one over here is more of that like desaturated green, but there are some like dimensional sparkles in here that make it a little interesting. And then this one over here is a proper multi-chrome, but it is a little bit muted, so I feel like it is pretty like wearable. Then this row up here, they're all iridescents and they're all different colors, but they kind of like match each column. So this one is more of like a cool tone pink, this one's a bit more orangey, this one's green. This one is a little different from this row because it's more of like a yellow that's a bit dimensional, but overall I love the versatility that they add to this palette. All in all, I think this is a really great starting point if you are new to Glaminatrix, but even if you have their other palettes, I feel like this is probably my favorite of their neutral offerings. Next up is Nearly Natural from Glaminatrix, and this one came out this year. It is fairly new. This is the inside. So I feel like this palette, in comparison to Barely Basic, leans more warm and neutral. I feel like there isn't a ton of cool tones in this palette, which makes sense, especially when I show you the next palette, which is far more cool toned. I feel like each of these palettes, each of their spicy neutral palettes fills like a specific niche. To me, this palette is the true everyday neutral palette because I feel like there isn't like a ton of color in this palette. You have like a lot of true neutral tones up here and down here as well. There are less like colorful neutrals in this palette as far as the mattes go, and you also have a proper black in this palette. But I still feel like with the range of mattes in here, you can get a pretty good range of looks depending on what combinations you go for. And formula wise, I feel like these mattes are the same as the one in Barely Basic, so they are very user friendly, very easy to work with. I have no issues with the mattes. Now the other reason that I feel like this is the true everyday neutral palette is because the shimmer formula in this palette is different from the other lab manufactured Glaminatrix palettes. And what I mean by that is that these are overall, for the most part, less sparkly than other Glaminatrix shimmers, and they have kind of a finer particle size. There are a couple of exceptions to that. This shimmer down here is a brand new formula for them. It is a baked shimmer, and this one up here is a pretty sparkly topper, but I feel like all of the rest of these shimmers have less sparkle than I am used to with other Glaminatrix palettes, and for that reason, I feel like this would be a very like office friendly palette. But I do really like that this shimmer up here is more of a topper shimmer, so I feel like you can kind of like sheer it out like this and you can see how beautifully sparkly that is. So you can layer this over any of these other shimmers to kind of like amp up the sparkle and give it a bit more of that oomph. And just to kind of illustrate the difference in sparkle level, I don't know how obvious it's going to be, but I swatched this shimmer from the palette over here, and this one is from Barely Basic in kind of like a similar tone. And I don't know if you can tell on camera, but in real life, this one is so much more sparkly and high shine. The last thing that I want to note about this palette is that there are no shifty shimmers in this palette. In Barely Basic, the iridescents are all shifty and there's that one shifty metallic shade, but in this one, they are mostly just like standard shimmers. Next up is Timeless Tones, and this one is the more cool toned offering from the brand, but there are still a few pops of color here. So this one once again has the same matte formula as the other two palettes, very easy to use, but I will say that the shade selection in this palette is not my favorite because I just feel like on me, I struggle a bit with like neutral cool tones. Like I like colorful cool tones a lot and I love this green row over here, but with like the neutral cool tones, I just feel like they skew extremely light. There are these three like very light shades here. I can't use that one. I can't use this one. This one I can like maybe get away with, but that leaves only this and this as like the mid-toned offerings. And I just wish that it was there was like a bit more variety here with the cool tone neutral shades. But if you have a lighter complexion or you just really like light beige mattes, then maybe this matte selection will be right up your alley. I also feel like with this blue row over here, I really wish that like this shade had been moved down and then we have like a lighter blue shade over here to kind of mirror the green row. I just feel like that would have rounded out the palette so well. But one thing I do really love that Glaminatrix typically does is that there is a beautiful range of depth over here. I love that we have a truly deep dark option in each of the rows to match all of the tones. The shimmers in this palette match Barely Basic in terms of sparkle level and shiftiness and all of that. In fact, it does have like a column of iridescence just like Barely Basic, and all of these are different tones from the iridescence in Barely Basic, but this one down here doesn't have like a shift or anything. It's that like icy silver white topper type of shade. It's pretty similar to the one in Nearly Natural, but I feel like this one is more silvery while that one is more of like a white, if that makes sense. And I feel like this one has a slightly larger particle size. Then with this column of shimmers over here, this one is once again a baked shade, and it is maybe just like a touch more charcoal than the black in Nearly Natural, but functionally they are pretty similar. So I do wish this had been more different because I feel like I essentially have like two of the same shade now. These three shimmers are beautiful. This one is similar to the like neutral shimmers in Barely Basic. It's just like slightly more cool toned and more of like a rosy taupe. And then both of these have like brownish neutral bases, and this one has like a green reflect and this one has a blue reflect, so I feel like they very much match the tones in this palette. I do really like overall like the shimmer selection in this palette, but I feel like since the mattes are not exactly what I want, I just don't reach for this palette much. Lastly, I really quickly want to talk about Sugar and Spice, and this is a slightly older palette from the brand, but I did check, and at the time of filming, this is still available on the website to purchase. I feel like a lot of people thought that this was the brand's like neutral, like spicy neutral palette, and you can see that the row of mattes in the middle do skew pretty neutral, but then you have these like bright pops at the bottom that are more like these pastel shades, I guess. And then a lot of the shimmers do like flip between being more neutral shimmers versus colorful shimmers. I think that this was the brand's first lab manufactured palette, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know like when the matte formula changed exactly, but the matte formula in this palette is just not my favorite. It's a little bit more difficult to blend out in my opinion. Sometimes it like sticks down a bit, and so I just don't reach into this palette for the mattes, but there are a few very special shimmers in here. This shade Nutmeg I've raved about for years at this point. I love it, and I feel like at this point I would not recommend this palette just for this shimmer. I would never recommend a palette just for one shimmer, but I just feel like Glaminatrix has taken whatever specialness is in this shade and replicated it in other shades. So I feel like, I don't know, I feel like other palettes are just like more my favorite, and this one is just like, I'll be honest, like sometimes I kind of forget that it exists in my collection. Now I'm going to move on to talking about a couple of palettes from Unearthly, starting with Sorcerous Smoke, because this is one of my favorite spicy neutral palettes in my collection. I adore this assortment of mattes and shimmers, and I have actually taken this palette traveling several times at this point. I feel like there's a really good range of tones with these mattes, and like these ones over here have like a touch of color to them, but they have this like muted quality to them that makes them very, again, wearable. I feel like if there's one like gripe that I have with the matte selection in this palette, I feel like these two are a little too close in tone, and I wish that one of them had been swapped out for more of a true neutral like mid-tone or a lighter shade to go with like this brown over here. But I do like that we have two deepening up options, this brown shade that could go with any of these mattes over here, and also this shade, which is not quite a black. If you know me, you know that I am kind of a hater of black mattes in my palettes, though I do think they make sense in neutral palettes. But this shade over here is more of like a soft black. It's more of like a charcoal, like a very, very deep charcoal. And I find it a lot easier to work with than a true black to add some like serious depth and smoke to looks. I also love this shade as like a soft smudgy liner on the lash line. These shimmers too are just so well curated, and a couple of the formulas in here are just like exceptional. This was the first palette that I tried from Unearthly, and I actually purchased this myself because I just heard such good things about it, and I'm so glad I did, because this is just one of the best purchases I think I've ever made. These two shimmers over here are probably my favorites in the palette because both of them have like a soft amount of color to them, but are so sparkly and dimensional. It is actually insane. Like, they are so stunning. I don't know like how well this is going to really translate on camera, but they are just so special, and they both have like kind of this like piecey texture to them. They can be sheared out really well, so you can wear them in like a sheer ethereal like sparkly wash of color, or even layer them over some of the other shadows in this palette. And speaking of layering, I love that they included this shimmer over here. It is like a bronze chocolate type of shade, and it's not like, it does have a little bit of sparkle to it, but it's not the most sparkly shade in the palette, like you can see over here. But I love layering these two shades over this. If I put just like a soft wash of this on my lid and then follow up with this, it's the most beautiful effect. This shimmer here is also super beautiful for a true like neutral type of look. I've swatched it over here, and again, I don't know if you're gonna be able to tell, but it's not like a true metallic all the way through. It has like a base and then these extra special sparkles that give it such a gorgeous dimensional sparkle. I love this shade so much, and this also layers really well over this bronze shade. Then you also have these shimmers over here for more smoky looks. I'll be honest, I don't use this one a ton, but this one I do really like. It's really pretty for just like a smoky, grungy type of look. The other neutral palette from Unearthly that I want to talk about is Murky Meadow, because I feel like this one does have a lot of those true neutral tones, though it does skew pretty warm in my opinion. Like, a lot of these are warm tones, and then you do have this like pop of neon like chartreuse in the center, and this one over here is a very dark green. I don't know like how well that's picking up on camera, but this is a dark green, and then you have a bunch of like neutral matte tones and then warm shimmers to accompany. There's nothing wrong with this palette, but it's just not my favorite because I do feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between like the very neutral tones versus like this neon pop. And I feel like in other palettes, like, I don't mind that, but for some reason in this palette, it just doesn't make as much sense to me personally. But I've seen so many people who do love this palette, so if you are someone who like really likes to add like just like a little bit of like a matte neon pop to your neutral looks, maybe you will really like this palette, because I don't think that there's anything wrong quality wise over here. It's just like not my personal favorite selection of tones in the palette. And I do really like the shimmers here, especially this one over here has that same piecey texture of those two shimmers in Sorcerous Smoke that I told you I love. Similar texture, but just like not as special as those, because it's not as like shifty. It's like mostly gold with like a warm base to it, so it's very pretty, but just like nothing like, I wouldn't reach for this on a day-to-day basis. I used to really love gold tones, but not as much anymore. But I do really like the range in like tone and depth of these shimmers. I feel like nothing is too close to each other, if that makes sense. Here's a palette that I was really excited about when it was first revealed. This is the Glamlite Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1 Jacob palette. These are such a mouthful to say, but maybe you can just see why I was so excited about this palette. I feel like this palette has an excellent range of neutral mattes and shimmers, and it does skew a bit more warm, which I don't mind. I know like the cool tone lovers will probably not find this as appealing, but there are a couple of cool tones in this palette, but I feel like a lot of the other like neutral shades skew more warm. And I really like the selection over here. I do feel like these two shades are a little too close. Like, I wish one of them had been more distinct. I do feel like this one is different from those other two. This one leans more like khaki, almost olivey, not quite, but like more khaki, and I feel like it really goes with this green matte over here, while these are just like warm toned browns. And I wish that one was like probably more cool tone, because I feel like this has like a bit of like a purpley undertone to it. It's like a bit of like a gray purple, and I feel like if one of these was more of just like a proper cool tone brown, that would have made this like a truly perfect matte selection. But still, I really like the matte selection in this palette, and Glamlite's formula is always like, for the mattes, I feel like it's really good. It's the shimmers where it's very hit or miss, but I'm happy to report that the shimmers in this palette are really, really beautiful. Once again, I feel like there's a good range of tone, texture, depth. There's just like a really good variety in this palette, and I feel like that's always like one thing that's kind of hard to do with neutral palettes that have mostly like neutral shimmers. I feel like it's hard to not just do a bunch of like champagne light shimmers, you know, but you have one over here that's very, very coppery, warm toned. This one over here is very like cool tone, and so is this one down here, but they're different. Like this one is a bit more, I guess, like grayish, taupey, purpley undertone, and this one has like almost a bit of green in it. But then you have like these proper green shimmers over here, and this one over here is actually a duochrome. Then you have this one over here that's like a more rosy brownish shade. That's not true, but I don't know. I feel like the neutral shades in this palette are just like, they're all different enough. And the quality of the shimmers is like the Glamlite Garfield palette. If you know, you know. Those shimmers are so sparkly and special. They're not as like large particle size as some other indies, but I think that this is like definitely like a step up from even ColourPop, I would say. And this palette is so affordable that I just think like this is such a good offering from Glamlite, and I would feel comfortable traveling with this palette too, which makes it just like all around such a great palette. This is Fantasy Cosmetica's Fighter palette, which in my opinion is probably like the most neutral offering from the brand. I feel like their other palettes are all far more colorful, and you can see here that the mattes are mostly like neutral tones with one mustard, which again, I feel like this, a lot of people consider this kind of a neutral, especially if you have a warm or golden undertone in your skin. Like on me, mustards just kind of like disappear into my complexion. So I really do like the matte offering in this palette, and the shimmers do skew pretty neutral as well. I feel like these all have like a touch of color in them, but they're just like neutral adjacent, and a lot of them have like dimensional multicolored sparkles in them. But I will say that most of the shimmers in this palette are not like the most sparkly. They're not satins by any mean, and they are like metallic and have some sparkle, but I feel like this one up here is like the only truly like super sparkly shade in the palette, and then the rest of them are just like more of like a metallic. I don't know if like, yeah, I think you can tell like how sparkly this one is versus this one. And even if I build this one up a bit more, it still retains that sparkle to it, versus this one is just like more high shine, which there's nothing wrong with this type of formula, but it's just not my favorite. So I don't really reach for this palette a lot overall. But if you are someone who does prefer these more like metallic type of shimmers, then you might really like this palette as just like dipping your toes a little bit into color without fully going into like bright pops. Now this palette is very new to my collection. I haven't even used it yet. I've only swatched it, but I still wanted to talk about it. This is Magnetic Mineralia from Dieverune Cosmetics in collaboration with S. Andromeda from Instagram. And the reason I wanted to show it to you is because this is Andromeda's perfect curation of like everyday neutrals. And I feel like this palette kind of follows the format of some of the previous palettes, where there is a good selection of like neutral and neutral adjacent tones with a couple of those brighter pops slash tones that a lot of people do, I feel like, consider neutrals. And for me personally, these like dusty purple shades up here, those are my like perfect like everyday neutral adjacent tones. So I am very excited to use this palette and have more like solid thoughts on it once I use it. But just like from swatching it and thinking about the looks that I would do with it, I do feel like this is something that I could reach for every day to do like very like basic looks, but also like looks with like an extra special something, because these shimmers are no joke. Now these two over here are kind of just like standard shimmers with a little bit of texture to them, but they can be sheared out to more of like a PC finish. Like you can see over here, like that is such a beautiful sparkle. And I feel like those are the only true like neutral shimmers in the palette. The rest of them have like a little bit of color or something special. This one over here is actually so unique, and I am very, very excited to use this in a look. I feel like you can't really see the magic of it from far away, but it is just loaded with so much dimensional sparkle on this like beautiful warm toned base, and I just like, oh, I cannot wait to get this all over my lid. Lastly, this shimmer over here is such a special formula. It is, I think it's called the Phantom Shifter formula from Dieverune, and you can see over here, like it takes a couple of layers to build up, but it shears out so well for an extremely sparkly scattered finish. Like it is such a special formula, and I just want to see more and more shimmers from Dieverune in this formula. Next up is Cosmic Brush's Smoulder, and I want to mention that Cosmic Brushes does have like a couple other like true neutral palettes in their lineup. They have Neutrals, and I feel like Cool Trolls has a little bit of color, but a lot of people consider that in the neutral realm. But I just don't have either of those palettes, so that is why I am not talking about them in today's video. Here's the inside of Smoulder, and you can see that this is mostly a cool toned palette with a ton of neutral mattes and then a couple of like pink options up here. But I do feel like, you know, we've talked about this before, pinky mauvey tones are very easily like in the spicy neutral area. I actually recently saw on the Cosmic Beauty Instagram that they mentioned that all of the matte shades in this palette are not pressed pigments, they are actual eyeshadows. So they are meant to be like easy to sheer out into a light wash of color, and I do find that to be the case. I was talking about this in my dedicated video using this palette, that their matte formula is so easy to work with and like just like do that sheer wash of color. I really do agree with that statement. I also think that this is such a fantastic selection of mattes. You know, you have some like true like neutral but cool tone browns, then you have these two over here that have like a touch of pinky berryness to them but are still I think in like the neutral category, and then over here like they have a lot more pink to them. Then you have some proper like gray neutrals over here and like solid deepening up options for the entire palette. It is just so well curated. And the shimmers too, this is kind of a recurring theme, but with the neutral shimmers in this palette, I just love that there is a good variety. So we're not just getting a bunch of like silver shades, because I feel like with cool toned neutral palettes, a lot of the time the shimmers just end up looking the same. They look like a silvery, icy, gray wash of sparkle. But over here we have like a true icy shade, a true like gunmetal, something that's a bit deeper, a more chocolate shade, something that's a bit more taupey. This one has like a hint of green, and then we actually have two multi-chromes in this palette, one that's more like blue base with a pink reflect and one that has a gray base with a pink reflect. So if you do want to add a little bit more color to your looks, this is how you would do that. All in all, I am a huge fan of pretty much everything Cosmic Beauty does. I just feel like their palettes are so well done and also really affordable without compromising on quality. Sure, you're not going to get a ton of multi-chromes in the palettes, but I do think that their shimmer formula has improved a lot from like when they used to have like Muse and Serenity till now. Like these shimmers are so sparkly and pretty. This is Urban Neutrals from Arttitude Cosmetics, and here's what the inside looks like. I feel like this is another one of those palettes that has like a little bit of color but is still mostly neutral and very approachable, especially if you like cool tones. I do also have their Vintage Neutrals palette, but I'm not including it in this video because I think you can see here, this does feel like a mostly neutral, approachable, spicy neutral palette, but this one over here has such bright pops that I feel like I would not call this a neutral palette. And I know that the owner has explained like her logic behind this, but I feel like I would include this maybe in a different video of like colorful palettes that are more easy to approach if you like neutrals, if that makes sense. Let me know if you would be interested in a video like that. But going back to Urban Neutrals, I feel like this is a cool toned lover's dream because almost every single shade in this palette is properly cool toned. Maybe not this neutral over here, and perhaps not this purple. It could pull a little bit more neutral or warm depending on your skin tone, but I feel like, yeah, every other shade in this palette is so cool toned, and all of the colorful shades have a bit of like murkiness or desaturation to them that makes them very like approachable and wearable. I also want to point out that this is a pretty matte heavy palette. There are only 5 shimmers in this palette, and I feel like this one, this one, this one are the 3 shifty shades, and then these 2 are just like standard shimmers, but they are pretty sparkly, so they're not just like flat metallic shades. Like, they still have a little extra pizzazz to them, which makes them special, but I think if you are a matte lover, then this palette will be more up your alley. I do also feel like Arttitude has improved their shimmers just overall since this palette. I think that the shimmers in Ink and Roses and the newer Arcana palette are a lot more high quality than the ones over here. Like, I feel like this one is a little too textured for my comfort, and overall the newer shimmers are just not as like emollient and creamy, but I still do really like this palette for the matte selection. I feel like it's very concrete jungle vibes, which really fits the theme of the palette. It's kind of perfect for that. This is Davini's Davinity palette, and this is the neutral offering from this brand. As you can see, there are quite a few neutral matte tones, but there are also a couple of like neutral adjacent shades, as well as this like very bright pop of color over here. I actually feel like this is one of those palettes where the bright pop doesn't quite go with the rest of the palette. Like, you can use this with a couple of the deepening up options, but I just feel like it's like a bit displaced here. And I wouldn't even use this for like a matte inner corner the way I would with the neon yellow. Like, I can accept a neon yellow in a neutral palette, but a shade like this, like, there's no way that I would ever consider this a neutral. And overall, this is just like not my favorite palette from the brand, because there are a couple of things in here that just make it, I think, a little difficult to use. There is a sparkle matte over here, which is just like not my favorite formula, and there's also a sparkle hollow matte over here. Like, the sparkles are hollow sparkles, and so I really wish that there were no hollow sparkles in this shade, because this is actually not like too light for me to use. You know that I'm like a light beige hater in my palettes, and this would actually be like an acceptable shade for me to use to blend out with, or even as like a very soft transition shade, but I just wish that there was no hollow particles in it. And it's a shame, because I think that the tones of some of these other mattes are so interesting, like this one over here, this one over here, like all of them are just like really pretty, but there's like enough going on in this palette that I don't love, that I don't find myself reaching for it. That said, I do really appreciate that the brand owner is super receptive to feedback, and she heard from a lot of people in the community that no one really likes the pressed glitters that are in her palette, so she took them out. There are no pressed glitters in this palette, and I do feel like the shimmer selection here is really pretty, even if the palette is more matte heavy. The one shimmer that I don't like in this palette is this one up here. I just feel like it's not super sparkly. It's more of like a satin, but because it is so dark and like charcoaly, like I don't really know how I would use this. Next up is Elaina from Shellwe Makeup, and I always love the artwork that they do for their palettes. It's so pretty. Here is the inside of the palette. This is another mostly neutral palette with a couple of pops of color. And here, the pops of color come from these 2 shimmers, which I actually quite enjoy. I said this before, but I really do like to wear neutral mattes in the crease, or more muted, like desaturated mattes in the crease with like a brighter shimmer that pops in the lid. And I prefer it when those shimmers are sheer or have like a more neutral base, and I feel like this shimmer is exactly that. I don't know how much you're gonna be able to tell, but I feel like the base is more of like this neutral, like grayish tone, so I feel like it does mesh really well with the mattes actually. And this green shimmer over here, for us olive girlies, like a green shimmer is always going to be basically a neutral. I will say with this palette, these 2 shimmers over here are very pretty in the texture. I really love them, but I just feel like even in the pan, but especially when you swatch them, they are so similar. This finger's a little stained, so ignore that, but they are so similar that I feel like I can't justify both of them being in the same palette. Like, functionally, they're going to look incredibly similar on the eyes. But I do really like the inclusion of this more satin shade over here. I really like to use satins in a layering capacity to put more topper shades like this on top of, and I really love the tone of this one. As far as the matte selection goes, it's fine. It's not my favorite, and Shellwe's matte formula is not my favorite either. It's not bad, there's nothing wrong with it. I just have other matte formulas that I enjoy working with a lot more. So that paired with a couple of the other like drawbacks in this palette, in my opinion, make it one that, again, that I don't reach for much, but I'm thinking that maybe I should depot one of these two shimmers and pop it into like my sparkly topper palette, because then maybe I will get more use out of these, because I really do enjoy these two shades. Now I'm going to move on to my Bella Beauté Bar neutral palette, starting with Smokey Glam, and also there is a small strip of sunlight coming in through the window that I'm unable to block. Sorry about that, but hopefully it won't affect things too much. So this is the original Smokey Glam palette. There is a new revamped version of it that I'm not going to include in this video. I actually have a full dedicated video to that new Smokey Glam where I compare it to this one, but the TLDR is that the new one really eliminates a lot of these neutral tones down here as well as the neutral shimmers, and it makes it mostly like a pinky, mauvey, purpley palette, so I don't feel like it really fits with the whole neutral, spicy neutral theme. This one, you can see it does have like quite a few neutral tones down here, and they're mostly like gray tones and like greenish gray tones, which a lot of people loved about this palette, and I can definitely see why. I feel like for me, with my olive undertone, greenish gray tones are the ones that are gonna like mostly just kind of like disappear into my skin tone rather than being at odds with my skin tone. I will say some of them though are a little too similar in my opinion to be in the same palette. Like I feel like these two grays are pretty similar. These two, like there's just like not a lot of depth or tonal differences between them, and most of the palette is like more of these like pinky mauvey tones, which I do consider like neutrals. Maybe not these like super bright pops, but tones like this, even this one over here, these tones over here I would consider in like the spicy neutral category. And I feel like a lot of the shimmers here are very, very neutral leaning. These ones down here and these two were eliminated from the new Smokey Glam palette, which is such a shame because I do think that this texture is really pretty, and like it's just like such a gorgeous metallic shimmer that can be built up to like a high shine finish, but also sheared out for more of like a scattered sparkly finish like that. Like that is so beautiful. But I will say that we didn't need like 5 of them. I feel like these two are pretty close in tone, and then these 3 are very close in tone, so you definitely don't need all of them. And also this palette is no longer available. The owner said that she hasn't decided fully that she'll like never bring it back. Like if there's a lot of demand, then maybe. So if you're one of those people who really wants this palette, I would go blow up her comments. I will say overall, I don't really reach into this palette for these duochrome shimmers. They're not my favorite formula, and a bunch of these duochromes did carry over to the newer Smokey Glam in an updated formula that I much prefer, but I do really enjoy this palette for the matte selection. But again, since that newer palette has a bunch of these pinky mauvey tones, I no longer reach with this palette actually. I did used to back in the day, but not as much anymore. Next up is Morally Grey, which is this cute little 9 pan with the heart-shaped pans, which I know were like very divisive in the community, and I almost feel like this is like a super condensed version of Smokey Glam, because here they are side by side, and you can see that this kind of has a couple of the gray tones, a more charcoaly shade, a more like neutral shade with a bit of pink in it, a true pink shade, and like this ultralight beige matte, which I guess there's no like proper beige matte in here. There's a white down here, but there's no beige. But I do feel like this is like the ultra condensed version, but the shimmers in here are far superior and way more special than the shimmers in here. I do think for me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of the matte selection in this palette, just because like these two shades up here are just like a little too light for me to use. Even this one, I just feel like it is such a light pastel pink that I can't really use this as like a transition shade, and I don't really use pastel mattes like this. I hardly ever use them in my inner corner, and in such a small palette, I really want each and every shade to be useful to me. I do like this one over here as like a very neutral transition shade, but I do feel like it's not as like saturated and pigmented as other neutral mattes from Bella Beauté Bar. And then these two are just like, I don't know, I just wish like there was more like, I wish that the tones of the mattes were different in this palette, basically. I do, however, really like the shimmers in this palette. They're so pretty. Like, all of them are really gorgeous. This is a beautiful iridescent over here. This one is a very metallic, high shine, a little bit chunky shimmer, so maybe not everyone's cup of tea. This shimmer here is so, so special. It's this gorgeous, wet looking, dimensional, sparkly shade that just looks very neutral from far away, but then up close, there are a bunch of multicolored sparkles. I'm trying to see if I can get it to go out of focus so you can see that. And then let me swatch that metallic pink shimmer over here. It does smooth out in swatches, but I feel like I can feel the grit in here, so if you have like sensory issues, you may not like this shimmer. But all in all, I think that you would have to like really enjoy the matte selection in this palette to want it, if that makes sense. That paired with the heart-shaped pans. Then we have Melted Mattes, which is an entirely matte palette from Bella Beauté Bar. And I've said this before, but Bella Beauté Bar has one of my favorite matte formulas. And this palette is kind of like a split of like the top 2 rows being proper neutrals and the bottom 2 rows being neons. And even though I really like the formula for the neutrals, these neons are not my favorite formula. I also just like don't use neons a whole lot, but even like within neons, I feel like I have tried better ones than this, if that makes sense. So I don't really reach for these, but the matte selection here, it does skew a little bit more warm. So if you are a fan of warmer mattes and you're not very picky about your neon shades, then you might like this palette. But overall, it's just like, it's not one of my favorites from the brand, and I just don't reach for it that much. Unoriginal Nudes, though, also from Bella Beauté Bar, this is a banger of a neutral palette. It is so, so gorgeous. I feel like this palette is a true neutral palette. And what I mean by that is that with the matte tones, like you do have a couple of warmer shades, but then you also have some like proper neutrals like over here, over here, over here. And then you have some that even lean a little bit cooler, like this gray tone over here. And I would even say this one over here is more of like a rosy taupe with like a cool undertone. And I love that of these 3 mattes over here, like they all have different undertones, so they're not going to translate too similarly on the eyes. But they don't like skew super cool or super warm. So I feel like that's why this is a proper neutral palette, minus maybe this like pop of pink over here. And like I said before, Bella Beauté Bar's matte formula is such a joy to work with. It is just so malleable. It is so like, I feel like you can use it no matter what your blending style is, which can't be said for every brand out there. But I also feel like Bella Beauté Bar shimmers are just, they're so good. And I really do like the shimmer selection in this palette. I won't go too into detail because I do have a dedicated video covering this palette, so you can go reference that if you're more curious about the shimmers. But I do like that we have a variety of textures in this palette. Like these ones over here are more of that Skin of a Killer type of texture, which is like a legendary eyeshadow from the brand. It is this beautiful, just like toppery wet look type of sparkle that is so beautiful on its own, sheared out as a topper, just like whatever you want to do with it. But then you also have these 2 over here that are just like regular metallic shades that again can be sheared out a little bit. These actually remind me a little bit about those 2 metallic shimmers from the Dieverune Magnetic Mineralia palette that I was talking about earlier. Like they are very similar to that both in texture and tone. There's also a true hollow shade in here, which can add a little bit extra sparkle and shine to any of these, make any of them a hollow. So I just feel like this is a great solid like middle of the road neutral palette. Like if you're looking to add one to your collection and you don't have any, I think this is a really great starting point. This is Klarity's Glam Go palette, and this is very new to my collection. Like I have not even swatched this palette. That's how new it is. Like look at how pristine it looks. So I can't really give you any like thoughts on this palette because like I said, I haven't even touched these formulas, but I just wanted to show it because it has entered my collection recently, and this is very much like a neutral, spicy neutral palette. I feel like you have a lot of neutral tones in the mattes, neutral adjacent tones as well, and a bunch of these shimmers are just like very neutral, but then you have like a few pops of color. I'm very excited to swatch this purple one. Actually, I have already taken my palette shots, so maybe I'll just do a live swatch of this. Wow, that is a very pretty pastel purple, and I feel like it's rare to find like purple shimmers like this that are still like sparkly. It is more metallic than it is sparkly, but there are a few like sparkles running throughout it. I'm very excited to get acquainted with this palette, but I just wanted to show it to you guys. Next is Gourmande Girl's Mocha Moment, and I feel like this one came out not that long ago. This came out as the brand said it was a neutral palette, which I feel like was kind of controversial, at least when I did like a short using this palette, and I was like, what is neutral to you? So many people were like, how can you consider that a neutral palette? That has colors in it. But I do feel like, you know, a lot of people in the indie community, myself included, do consider this like basically a neutral palette. And I have said in the past that this is, you know, probably as close as a brand has ever come to curating my perfect selection of neutral mattes. It's not like perfect because I would have to do that myself, but it's very, very close. Because my perfect neutral palette would have some like mauvey pink tones, dusty purple shades, like a brown with a lot of berry in it. I would make it more berry toned, but this does have a little bit of like reddishness to it. Then there's this super deep burgundy shade over here, which I love in palettes. There are some neutral shades that are like, this one's pretty warm. It has a lot of yellow. This one's a bit cooler. And this one has like almost a touch of like this khaki undertone. Then you have this deep olive green matte, a true deep dark neutral brown, which I much prefer over a black. And for my preferences, I would switch out this like matcha green matte for more of like a mid-toned olive green matte. But I do think this is a very pretty shade. And considering that this is like a mocha coffee caffeine themed palette, I understand why this had to be like a matcha green shade, because the name is Matcha Mocha. So I really do think that the brand did such a good job of curating the matte selection in this palette. It's a really good variety that will give you a good range of looks. But to me, the weakness with this palette is the shimmers. There's only 5 shimmers in this palette, which is not a drawback. I don't mind a matte heavy palette, but if there are only going to be 5 shimmers, I want all of them to be very distinct and different and fit the mattes properly. And I just feel like with this palette, these 2 shimmers are just way too close to be in the same palette. They are super similar. You can see over here, and this one looks very cool toned in the pan, but it does have gold sparkles mixed into it. So when you swatch it, like, yes, it is primarily silver, but it again has gold. So I wish it had stayed like fully cool toned. And then these 2 are the remaining shimmers, and both of them are a bit more pink. So I just feel like this palette could have like taken out one of these 2 or taken out one of these, maybe this one, and like replaced it with a green shimmer to add more versatility to this palette, and then it would have been truly just like perfect. Now moving on to some palettes from Nomad, and I'm actually going to be starting with these 2 together because both of them are mini palettes. This is the Nomad Air palette, and this is the Nomad OSL. I think that's Oslo, if I'm not mistaken. It's like an airport acronym. So here are the insides, and as you can see, these are like true neutral palettes. Like, I would not even call these spicy neutral because like all of the mattes are properly neutral, and so are the shimmers. And I don't feel like any of these shimmers are like that super extra sparkly indie level of shine and almost like glitter. They're more like standard metallic shimmers. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, if you prefer a more standard metallic shimmer, these are lovely quality, but they're just like not super sparkly. And I have long said this about Nomad, that their shimmers are not my favorite as like standalone shades. I do like using them for layering. Like, I will put these down and then layer a more sparkly sheer topper shadow over them. But I really like Nomad's matte formula, especially in these palettes. This one over here actually did live in my top drawer for quite a long time because I feel like I could create such a perfect matte blend with these 3 shades up here. I would literally just go down the line, start with this one, then use this one, and finally deepen up with this, and it's just like the perfect like proper neutral on me. Like, yes, this does skew a little bit warm. It'll probably appear a bit more warm if you have a cooler complexion, but on me, these are like perfect neutral tones. I really enjoyed this palette for the mattes, and it's so tiny that it is really great for travel. And then if you prefer a more cool tone palette, there's this one over here. I do feel like the matte selection in this palette is not as evenly balanced as this one because I feel like there's such a big jump from this very light shade to these 2 like, I wouldn't even call these midtones, they're a touch deeper. So I wish that like one of these was like more of a proper mid-tone, and then I feel like these would be like the perfect assortment of cool tone neutrals. But I do appreciate that both of these, even though they're the same depth, they have different undertones. So this is more of like, it has a lot of gray in it, and this one's more of like a rosy undertone. Next is the Nomad Berlin Underground palette, and this is the re-released version of it. So it's been revamped slightly from the older version. The color story is just a touch different, but also the formulas in this palette have been upgraded. As you can probably see, this is a very shimmer heavy palette, and Like I said with the previous two, Nomad's shimmer formula hasn't always been my favorite, but the shimmers in this palette have definitely been upgraded. They have a little bit extra sparkle, twinkle, and shine than previous Nomad shimmers, and I feel like all of these kind of follow this format of having a base metallic shade with like extra special sparkles in it. Like, do you see that? That is so pretty. And sure, this is still not on the level of some other indies, but I do feel like for everyday wear, especially if you mostly wear neutrals, this is a wonderful level of sparkle. And just to compare, I went ahead and swatched one of the metallics from Nomad Air, the mini palette, and you can see it's more of just like a flat metallic. Nothing wrong with it, but this one has those extra sparkles running throughout. I do wish in this palette that the matte selection was just a little bit different, because I feel like there's a slight disconnect between the shimmers and the mattes, but I also don't have a problem like mixing and matching and pairing palettes. Like, while I do wish that the mattes matched the shimmers a little bit better, I could honestly like pull in the Nomad Air palette, and then like that would be my perfect assortment of like neutral mattes and sparkly shimmers. Lastly, from Nomad, I have the Chicago Speakeasy palette, and please just take a minute for this packaging because it's gorgeous. The red is like a felt, and then the gold is this metallic shine that you can see, and it's such a beautiful Art Deco style. Then here's the inside, and I feel like this palette is a bit of like a split color story. So you have a bunch of these neutral mattes over here, and then you have these dusty purple shades over here, which I've said before are like some of my favorite like everyday neutral adjacent shades that I like to wear. You again have this like pop of green, which like everyone seems to love putting in their palettes, which I don't really have a problem with. I do think that like it goes with like the green shimmer over here. And speaking of the shimmers, I do think that these shimmers are really pretty. Like, Nomad definitely leveled up with these shimmers a little bit. A lot of them have multicolored sparkles in them, and a lot of them are also shifty. Like, some of these are proper multichromes. So I think if you're someone that likes warm-toned neutrals and maybe want to dip into a little bit of color and you want some special shimmers and you like the Nomad formula, then this palette, I do think it's quite a lovely color story. Oh, and also I didn't find any of these shimmers to be like overly squishy or emollient, which is sometimes an issue in Nomad palettes, but in this one and the Berlin one, the shimmers were like pretty good quality. I'm gonna be finishing up this video with all of my Blend Money neutral palettes because I have several of them, 4 of them, starting with the Dollhouse, which is discontinued, and I am devastated about that because I adore this palette. Mine is pretty dirty on the outside because it's old at this point, but here is the inside. I love this palette. I just think that this is such an excellent assortment of neutrals and neutral adjacent shades with the mattes. I will say the shimmers in here, I never touch them. I don't like the shimmers in here. Blend Money has vastly improved their shimmers since this palette, and these, like, if you prefer just like more of a standard shimmer, they're fine, but I just have so many other shimmers I prefer. The mattes, however, my goodness, not only is Blend Money's matte formula one of my all-time favorites, but I just think this is such a great curation. I love the gradient layout that makes it so easy to just go down the line and do your makeup look. I will say the one thing that I wish for is that I wish there was less of a gap between the super light shades and these mid-tone shades, because I can't really use a ton of these as like transition shades. And then some of these are just like, I can use them as like my mid-tone transition shade, but I don't know, I wish there was less of a jump between these. I do really like how deep and dark this row goes. Like, my gosh, I love adding depth in the outer corner to really add definition and smoke things out. And I feel like so many palettes are afraid to go this dark. They may all look black on camera, but I promise you they have different undertones and they go perfectly with each column. And I do like that with the color assortment over here, these 2 rows are like proper neutrals again. Both of these I think lean a bit more cool toned. And then we have columns that have just like a little bit more color, and these are all of the tones that I like to use on a day-to-day basis. I have my olives, I have my pinky mauve tones, I have my dusty purple shades, and I don't use like peachy shades as much as I used to, but they are here as an option. Now, some people have told me that this purple column, like the Longing palette, could be a replacement for it, which I'll show you in a minute, but I can tell you for a fact that they are not the same kind of purple. And here are some swatches just to illustrate that. These 2 are from Dollhouse. They are these 2 shades, and then these 2 are the corresponding shades shades from Longing, and you can see how much more cool toned these are. I feel like this has so much more gray in it, and this one, it's like, it almost looks warm in comparison, but I do prefer these types of purples for my day-to-day shades over these. What I will say though, and I mentioned this in like my last video with the Ellis Volume 2 palette, I do feel like this column over here has been replaced by the similar column in the Ellis palette, which I will show you in a minute. But overall, I will be sad the day that the formulas in here stop performing, because this does live in my top drawer and I do reach for it quite frequently. Now I'm going to show you All Done Up, and I'm just going in the order that these palettes were released. So All Done Up came out after Dollhouse, and this is a slightly smaller neutral palette from Blend Bunny. As you can see, these tones are very different from the tones in Dollhouse. I feel like you do have a split here of more like cool tone shades and then more warm tone shades. And once again, I feel like all of these are very much like spicy neutral and neutral adjacent type of shades in the classic Blend Bunny gradient format. I really like this palette as well. This also lives in my top drawer because I don't know, I love the assortment in here. This green column over here is very unique. These tones, I've not found these exact tones in like other palettes. It's so gorgeous. And I do actually reach for this column quite a bit too. It is on the warmer side. And I mentioned with Dollhouse, I don't reach for like peachy orange shades as much, but this one, it's like, it's very brown. It does have like a bit of like rustiness to it, but it's so heavily brown that I feel like, I don't know, this is very easy for me to pull into looks. These shimmers also are a massive upgrade from Dollhouse. I feel like this palette was the first time that I really saw Blend Bunny just like level up their shimmers, and they have continued to do so. I feel like the shimmers in Garden of Stars are like, these are like honestly like so amazing, and Garden of Stars I feel like is on the same level as this. I will say though, I feel like these two are just like a little too similar to be in the same palette. Like they're both like goldish tone shades, and yes, this one's a bit more olive, this one's more of like a true gold. And this one, it has like silver sparkles over that pink base, and so I just feel like that pink base does not show up as much on me, and I wish that it was like more pink, I guess. Especially when you see how silvered this one is in comparison. I just feel like, yeah, I wish this one was more pink. Then we have Longing, and this one is one that everyone, myself included, went feral for when it was revealed, because look at this gorgeous, gloomy, rainy day of a palette. This is another palette that is for the cool toned lovers. It is for the cool tone lovers who love the desaturated, muted, but still a little bit colorful shades, because you do have, you know, a true neutral row, a gray toned, more neutral row, but then you have like this purpley row, this like muted teal row, one that's a bit more minty green, and then an olive row. And I feel like this one's maybe not properly cool toned, but everything else is, and it really does evoke like a gloomy, rainy day. And once again, this is another palette that lives in my top drawer because I just love how these mattes perform. I love the tones, I love the gradient, and I will say, of all of the Blend Bunny palettes that I have, where I feel like for the most part, the lightest shades in the gradient layout are usually unusable for me. This palette, I can actually use most of these, and that I love that. I also feel like the shimmers in here are very, very beautiful, definitely on par with the shimmers in All Done Up, and I don't find them to be lacking in any way, but once again, I do feel like these two shades are a little too similar to be in the same palette. They're both like icy, silvery white shades. Also, this palette does have one true multichrome. It's this one over here, and it goes from like a blue to more of a purple at an angle on this like beautiful berry purple base. It is stunning. Lastly, we have the newest palette on the block, Ellis Volume 2, and I do have a dedicated review video for this, so once again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this palette, but what I do want to say is that I love it when Blend Bunny does all matte palettes, because though the brand has massively leveled up their shimmers from what they used to be, I for my preferences, I'm still not likely to reach for them over some other brands. I still feel like for myself, I want all of like the textured sparkle and shine. And their shimmers, though they are very sparkly now and beautiful, they have like a bit of a smaller particle size. So I feel like when you get them on the eye, they're not going to be as sparkly and shiny as some other brands. But I do really, really love the offering in this palette. It is mostly cool toned minus this one warm row over here. And this palette is also offered as 2 split mini palettes. So one of them is very, very cool toned. It has this row, and this pink row. And then the other palette is less cool toned. They say it's the warm toned one, but I just think it's like less cool toned because it has this row, and this row. And I feel like this one is still cool toned. This one is more neutral, and then this is the warm column. So also I keep saying row instead of column. It's a pet peeve of mine, but I've been doing it nonstop and I apologize. But yeah, if you were only interested in some of the shades from this palette, it might be worth checking out the mini palettes. Quality-wise, this palette lives up to the other Blend Bunny palettes. I did mention that I could have done with one less actual row in this palette because I do feel like the lightest shade in this palette is just like the lightest shades in each column. They are unusable for me, but because there is such an even or such a slight gradient throughout, I feel like I would have done with just like these 4 shades, just these 4 shades. Just these 4 shades. Like that would have been great for me, but I totally understand if you have a lighter complexion, you probably need or desire these lighter shades. The other thing I want to point out is I feel like the deepening up shades in this palette, they do look very deep on camera and they can be used to smoke out the outer corner, deepen up things, but I feel like these don't go quite as deep as the other, like the shades in the other neutral palettes that I showed you previously. I feel like those go super, super deep dark, which I really, really appreciate. And this palette is just like, there's a bit of softness in these deepening up shades. Editing Nupur here. So I forgot to film during this video what like my top favorite palettes out of all of these are, because there are quite a few in this video, but here are my top 8 favorites. And I feel like if I could only keep 8, these would be all of the tones and textures and shimmers that I would need to do any kind of neutral look for my day-to-day makeup. That is it for this video. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end. If you made it here, I know that this is probably going to be a longer video. I won't know for sure until I'm editing, but just based on how long I've been filming, I'm guessing it's going to be a longer video. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this style of video, and also what is your favorite neutral palette, because I feel like I mentioned this in the beginning, but it's going to be highly based on your preferences. So like, what do you look for in a neutral palette, and what is your favorite neutral palette, whether it's indie or mainstream? Also, please don't forget to give this video a like before you go, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!